So tonight, Bradley's obviously, he's not here, in case you couldn't tell. He's in Tucson with his father. I guess they're going to a graduation. So I'm filling in for him. Tonight, I want to talk to you guys about a story. A story actually from Mark chapter 9. It's 14 through 29 if you guys feel like looking it up. So basically, when Jesus would teach, he was such a great teacher that so many would come and flock to him. So he'd have big crowds that he was talking to. And at one point, people would try and get to Jesus. And the disciples, they were kind of like an outer barrier. So when people would come to the disciples, they'd say, hey, I want to meet Jesus. And then a lot of the disciples would bring those people to Jesus. And so this happened quite often. We see different places. We've talked about it before you. This instance in Mark 9, a man comes with his son. His son has a demon. His son is demon possessed. And the child would be gripped by the demon from birth, it says. From a very young age, obviously, the child would be gripped by the demon and would be completely engulfed. He'd go into a seizure, he'd foam at the mouth, he'd become rigid, it says, he'd probably fall down. Just completely scary. Any of you parents, I can imagine, you'd realize how you'd react if your child had that constantly. And so the father, saying, hey, Jesus is a great teacher, he's done many miracles, let's see if I can get to him. So he gets to his disciples, right? He gets to his disciples and he asks the disciples to cast out this demon. And they didn't do it. The disciples were asked to heal this boy and they couldn't do it. Stumped. Just tried, failed. Nothing. And so the man was actually getting into an argument. He was getting into an argument and Jesus came up and said, hey, what's going on? Why is this argument going on? And the man explains what happened. He explains about his boy. And his boy actually starts going into that same thing. Starts having that same moment where the demon grips him. He falls down, becomes rigid, starts foaming at the mouth, starts having a seizure. And Jesus looks, as he always does, and he rebukes the spirit. He rebukes the spirit. But in the midst of this, what's happening is the Father. The Father is petitioning Jesus, right? Right before he goes to Jesus and he says, if you can do anything, please help my boy. If you can. You guys have heard of Jesus, right? Can he do that?
Yeah.
He's able. He's able. We have songs all over the place where it says, our God is able, right? So we know that Jesus has the ability. This man doubted. Exact quote from Jesus. Let me see if I can find it quickly. But he tells him that all things are possible for those who have faith. And in this moment, this man seeing his child gripped, this man understanding that his lack of faith could prevent his child from being healed by this great teacher, he cries out. He cries out in this moment and says, help my unbelief. That's one of the greatest proclamations in Scripture. He cries out and says, dear God, help my unbelief. And Jesus says, I will. I will. I intend to. I wish to. I will do it. And he heals the boy. Where this comes into play, speaking about pray, how this fits in, is later he talks to the disciples, Jesus, and the disciples are like distraught. They're not understanding. We're supposed to be after you. We're your apostles. We go out and we do miracles in your name. Why couldn't we cast out this demon? He says this one only comes out through prayer. Other verses clarify prayer and fasting. But I think that this is incredibly important to us tonight. Incredibly important because we're talking about evangelism. We're talking about how does our prayer lives affect evangelism? In Jesus' time, the way he interacted with people, the way he gave himself validation as Christ, is he did many miracles. He did great wonders and signs. In doing that, it was his witness, it was his testimony, it was bearing testimony of himself and God in such, because they knew only God could do these miracles. So when Jesus did this, it was a form of early evangelism. It was a form of evangelism. We obviously don't do it the same way, right? Most of us aren't going around and casting out demons all the time. It's a different culture, I believe. I think it's a different world we have today. However, Jesus says that we must be in prayer. He says we must be in prayer for these kind. He said this one only comes out through prayer. Now understand that this unbelief that the Father had, I believe that's what Jesus is referencing. He's saying this only comes out through prayer. I think we need to focus on the importance of prayer through our evangelism. As I'm going to talk about later, prayer before we even enter an evangelism situation, before we ever even talk to someone. Prayer during the situation and prayer through the situation, prayer after the situation, prayer looking back. I think that evangelism has to be completely engulfed in an attitude of prayer for us to be successful. We see it from the disciples. That's where Jesus said they lacked. He said, this one only comes out through prayer. So I think as we go later, we'll see even more examples, actually. But I'd like to welcome up Zach.